I was 42 years old, and I had been married for almost 15 years. Over that time, our life had undergone many changes. The birth of 2 children, moves, ups and downs. We lived in a quiet suburb in Missouri, in a house that my husband had bought before we got married. Our neighbors always said that we were the picture-perfect family. His steady job, my cozy home, children who were always well-dressed and did their homework on time. From the outside, everything seemed flawless, but inside, I felt our marriage slowly falling apart. At one point, we had been in love, made plans, and dreamed about the future. But as time went on, everything changed. Each day turned into an endless routine. I made breakfast, got the kids ready for school, did the laundry, and cleaned. My husband would leave early in the morning and come back late in the evening. Even the weekends were consumed with his quiet immersion in work or TV. We rarely talked, except when discussing household matters. Passion disappeared, and with it, closeness. At first, we had a few evenings where we could be alone together, but even those faded away over time. Months passed, then half a year, and I realized that in all that time, we had never once been truly together. At first, I tried to ignore it. I thought maybe it was temporary. We were tired, had kids, and were busy with work. But with each passing day, I felt more and more empty. It was like a rift that slowly grew wider until it became a chasm. I tried to figure out why. Maybe I wasn't attractive to him anymore. Maybe I had changed. One day, I decided to talk to him. It was an ordinary evening. The kids were already asleep. I was cleaning the kitchen, and he was sitting on the couch with his tablet. I sat across from him and tried to start a conversation. His response was painful. He looked at me as if I was distracting him from something important and said, "It happens. We're not newlyweds anymore, so no need to put on a show. Everyone goes through this." His words cut me deeply. They felt like a sentence, but I didn't give up. I wanted to save our marriage, to bring back what we once had. I started cooking romantic dinners, tried to plan surprises. I bought a new dress that I had always thought was too bold for me. I even suggested we spend a weekend alone, leaving the kids with their grandmother. But his response remained the same. Sometimes he looked at me with slight pity, as if I was wasting my time. Other times, he just brushed me off, like an annoying fly. There was one evening when I tried again to talk about us. I asked him why he didn't even want to try to change things. His answer knocked the wind out of me. "If it's so important to you, find someone else. Just make sure I don't find out." His calm tone made those words even more cruel. I sat in silence, not knowing what to say. That was the moment I felt everything had crumbled. But instead of giving up, I began to think about myself. When you live for others, your husband, your kids, your home, you forget who you really are. I had stopped feeling like a woman. There was no passion, no desire, not even a simple spark of interest. And then I realized I wanted to change something, if only for myself. A few weeks later, one of my friends invited us to a party. My husband, of course, refused. He always found an excuse to stay home. "You know I'm not interested in hanging out with your friends," he said dismissively, adding that he'd be happy to stay with the kids. That was typical of him. He always chose the comfort of home over something new. But I decided to go. I needed a distraction. At the party, I met a man who became a breath of fresh air. He was a little older than me, with silver hair and a gentle smile. We struck up a conversation, and suddenly, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. He was attentive, curious about my hobbies, and he listened. It was something new. I didn't feel like a mother of 2 or a married woman, but simply myself, a woman who was enjoying the attention. We exchanged numbers under the pretext of discussing music, and I left the party feeling lighter. The next morning, I received a message from him. It was a short, "Hi, hope you got home without any issues." But in those words, there was more warmth than I had received from my husband in the past few years. That's how our correspondence began. Every message from him felt like a small celebration. We talked about books, music, even shared childhood memories. I found myself eagerly waiting for each new message. It became my little secret, my salvation. With him, I felt alive. But along with that came the guilt. I knew this was wrong. I was married. I had children. But something inside me screamed that I deserved a little happiness, even if only for a moment. It all started with messages, innocent, short, light. I remember smiling as I read them, feeling warmth from the simple fact that someone wanted to get to know me without judgment or expectation. Unlike my husband, who for the past few years barely noticed my attempts to talk or share anything personal, this man showed genuine interest. He asked about my hobbies, wanted to know what I loved to do in my free time, and I didn't even know how to answer. For so many years, I had lived in a home, kids, husband routine that I had forgotten who I was and what I wanted. We wrote to each other every day. Sometimes it was just simple questions like, "How was your day?" Other times he would share his thoughts on books or movies, and I was surprised at how much we had in common. We both loved old rock bands, both enjoyed admiring paintings in museums, even though neither of us was an art expert. He was an interesting, easygoing, yet incredibly deep conversationalist. Each message from him felt like a little piece of light in my gray, everyday life. At first, I thought of it as friendship. I thought I had finally found someone I could talk to about everything without the fear of being judged. But gradually, something changed. I began to look forward to his messages with a racing heart, catching myself checking my phone every few minutes. In the evenings when the kids were asleep, I could spend hours chatting with him, forgetting everything else. I would tell my husband I was reading articles or watching videos to distract myself, while I sank deeper into this new world. There was something magical about our conversations. Even the simplest words from him made me feel alive. He didn't just give me compliments, he noticed the little things, like how I described my favorite coffee shop, or how I used to love the smell of rain as a child. He remembered everything, and that attention to detail was captivating. With him, I felt like a woman who was valued not for her ability to cook lunch or do the laundry, but for her thoughts, dreams, and desires. This feeling uplifted me. I started to notice how much I had changed. I began wearing makeup again, even if I was just taking the kids to school. I bought a few dresses that I had been eyeing for a while but had never dared to wear. I started taking better care of myself. I joined a gym and revised my diet. All of this seemed like an attempt not just to get back to who I was, but to be someone he would like. My husband didn't notice anything, or maybe he was pretending not to. He left early, came back late, and our conversations were limited to mundane things. This gave me the space to continue living in my little secret. But every day, I felt like this correspondence was becoming something bigger. We met for the first time a few weeks after the party. It was a completely random encounter in the city center. I was walking down the street with a cup of coffee in hand, thinking about how many things I still needed to get done, when he called out to me. His voice was as soft as it had been in my thoughts. We talked while sitting on a bench in the park. It was a short conversation, nothing special, but I left with the feeling that a wave of emotions had hit me. He was just like in our messages, genuine, kind, attentive. And that scared me. After that meeting, our messages became even more frequent. I could no longer deny that this person meant something more to me. I knew it was wrong, that we both had families, but I couldn't stop. Every day with him reminded me of how much I had lost over the years of my marriage. And this comparison wasn't in favor of my husband. Our first real meeting happened a month after that walk in the park. He invited me for coffee. I hesitated for a long time, but eventually agreed. We met at a small cafe on the other side of the city, where no one could recognize us. At first, I felt nervous, guilty, but his ease and kindness quickly eased my tension. We sat and talked as if we had known each other all our lives. It felt so natural that I forgot all my doubts. That day, we touched for the first time. It was just a light gesture. He took my hand as I was telling him something, but that was enough to turn everything inside me upside down. I felt a surge of emotions I hadn't experienced in years. With him, I was once again a woman, not just a mother or wife. After that meeting, I couldn't stop. We started seeing each other more often. These were brief encounters, coffee, walks, conversations, but each one made me happy. I laughed again. I felt the blood rushing through my veins. My heart skipped a beat when I looked at him. It was what I had been missing for so many years. But with that came the guilt. I looked at my children and wondered what they would say if they knew their mother was leading a double life. I looked at my husband, who, despite his indifference, was still part of my life. These thoughts tormented me, but I couldn't give up the happiness I had found. Each new meeting with him felt like a breath of fresh air I had been craving for all these years. It wasn't anything grand or romantic like in books or movies. These were simple moments, talking over coffee, walking in the park, a warm hand that lingered on mine for a moment. But in those moments, I felt happy. With him, I was once again myself, not a mother, not a housewife, but a woman who was listened to, understood, and valued. Our meetings gradually became more frequent. He was always so tactful, never pushed me, never suggested anything that might scare me or make me feel uncomfortable. That was one of the reasons I had grown so attached to him. He seemed like the perfect conversationalist, attentive, understanding, ready to listen and support. I didn't even realize how much he had begun to influence me. I remember one of the days when we met at a small cafe on the edge of the city. He arrived early, took a table in the corner, and waited for me with a cup of coffee. That was when I first noticed how he looked at me differently than my husband did. In his gaze, there was something that made me feel beautiful, desired, special. It was a new and, at the same time, frightening feeling. That was when I first realized that this connection had begun to go beyond simple friendship. It was no longer just communication, just messages, just occasional meetings. It had become something that filled my life, gave me the strength to wake up in the morning and get through all the routine tasks that used to seem unbearable. With him, I felt better in every sense. Even my appearance had changed. My friends noticed that I was smiling more, paying more attention to myself. I would say I had just started focusing more on my health. That was true, but not the whole truth. Every day, I understood more and more that he had become something more than just a friend to me. But along with that came an increasing sense of guilt. It was quiet but persistent, like a soft whisper in my mind, reminding me that I was crossing a boundary I had set for myself. I began asking myself questions. Why am I doing this? Why is his attention so important to me? And most importantly, what happens next? These thoughts didn't leave me even at home. When the kids were playing in the living room and my husband was watching TV, I would catch myself thinking not about them, but about him. In the evenings, As I was falling asleep, I would recall our meetings, his words, his gaze, and every time it brought me both joy and pain. A couple of months later, our connection moved to a new level. It happened unexpectedly, almost by accident. We met at his office, where he invited me in for just a minute to show me something interesting. I agreed, not expecting anything special, but that minute turned into several hours. We drank coffee, laughed, and discussed everything under the sun. Then, he suddenly moved closer to me. It felt so natural, so right, that I couldn't resist. Our first kiss was brief, but it turned everything inside me upside down. After that, our meetings became more intimate. We began to meet in places where no one could recognize us. It was dangerous, but it was precisely this danger that made it even more thrilling. With him, I felt not just alive, but needed, desired. It was like coming back to life after many years of hibernation. But the guilt never left. It grew stronger, more intense. Sometimes I would look at my husband and ask myself, why am I continuing this? He never hurt me. Yes, he was cold and distant, but did that justify my actions? Did that give me the right to break the vow I had made so many years ago? I tried to justify myself, telling myself it was just a moment of weakness, that it would pass. But with each passing day, I realized it wasn't that simple. This connection had become something more than just a passing infatuation. It had become my refuge, the place where I could truly be myself. And I didn't want to give that up. My husband still hadn't noticed anything. Or perhaps he just didn't want to notice. He was too absorbed in his own world to pay attention to the changes happening in me. This gave me the space to continue my double life, but at the same time, it made the guilt even stronger. I started to think about where all this was leading. What would happen if he found out? What if the kids found out? These thoughts never left me, but I kept living in this parallel world, where I was happy, even if only for a short time. Over time, I began to understand that my connection with him had become something more than just a secret escape. It could no longer be called innocent flirting or a temporary distraction. It had become a true double life, and each day, that duality was becoming harder to bear. On one side was him, the man who made me feel alive, desired, and needed. On the other was my family, my children who knew nothing, and my husband, who remained indifferent to the changes in me. I increasingly found myself thinking about how much longer this could continue. I knew that sooner or later it would end, but I couldn't find the strength to end the relationship. He had become like a lifeline I was afraid to let go of, fearing that if I did, I would drown again in the emptiness that had filled my marriage. One day, sitting in my car in front of his office, I wondered, what if he called me and said it was over? What if I never heard his voice again, never saw his smile again? The thought struck me with such pain that I realized how much he had become a part of my life. It frightened me. But what also frightened me was that I still couldn't find the courage to leave my husband. Deep down, I knew I was hurting not only myself, but others as well. Every time I looked at my children, I felt guilt tightening around my throat. They were still too young to understand, but I knew that if the truth ever came out, it could shatter their idea of family. I looked at my husband and thought, does he deserve this? He was indifferent, but he wasn't a bad person. He had never raised his voice at me. He always helped with the kids. But his coldness, his inability to see me as a woman, not just a mother and housekeeper, was tearing me apart from the inside. My inner contradictions reached their peak when I accidentally saw a picture of his wife. We had never discussed her, and I had never tried to look her up, but one day, scrolling through my social media feed, I came across a photo of her from a mutual acquaintance. She was so sweet, natural, genuine. In her eyes I saw warmth that, perhaps, had once been in mine. This sight shook me to my core. I saw her for the first time as a real person, not just an abstract wife, and it broke something inside me. I began to think about how my affair, no matter how significant it seemed to me, was destroying lives, not only my children's, but hers as well. She had no idea. She was living her life, and I was taking away from her what was rightfully hers. The thought became unbearable. We met a few more times after that, but I could feel that I couldn't continue. Every time I looked at him, I saw her face. I saw my children. I saw my husband, who, despite his indifference, was still part of my life. My guilt grew stronger with each passing day, until it became unbearable. One day, I wrote to him that we needed to talk. We met at the same cafe where our story had begun. I explained to him that I couldn't go on anymore. He listened to me silently, without reproach, without trying to convince me otherwise. His gaze was full of understanding and some kind of sadness, but he didn't say a word against it. He knew this decision had been hard for me, but he also knew it was the right one. We said our goodbyes. It was one of the hardest moments of my life. I left without looking back, trying to hold back the tears. I knew it was the right thing to do, but that didn't make the pain any less. I had lost not only him, but also a part of myself that he had helped me rediscover. From that point on, we never saw each other again. I deleted his number, stopped going to the cafe where we used to meet. It was painful, but I knew it was necessary. I focused on my family, on my children. I started finding the strength within me to try to fix what, to me, seemed beyond repair. At some point, I realized that I couldn't go back to being the person I was before. This experience had changed me forever. It reminded me that I deserved to be happy, that I can be desired and valued. But it also taught me that sometimes you have to make choices that break your heart in order to preserve yourself.